Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, Patrick Donohoe here, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal. I'm joined by IFA's chief economist, Rowena Dwyer, to talk about the IFA's pre-budget submission for 2016. Rowena, you're looking for €580 million from the Rural Development Programme to be divvied up equally among farmers. What are the top-line figures that you're looking for in this year's budget?
Hi, Patrick. Yeah, as you know, we're actually in year 3 of the Rural Development Programme, and this year, the programme was approved in Brussels in May, which means that a variety of new programmes have been introduced and continuing programmes have to be funded. So what we're saying in this year's budget submission is that the money that's committed by government, it's time to see it being allocated in the budget so that all the programmes can be run properly next year. And
some of the figures that you're looking at, an increase in the suckler cow herd support through the beef data genomics and the sheep supports as well.
That's correct. There's 2 areas in particular in the dry stock sectors that realistically direct income support is required. So we've clearly highlighted what's required, yo premium and a payment to the suckler cow through the beef data and genomics scheme. In addition to that, I suppose a key issue next year, or a key programme next year, is the rollout of GLOS. We're looking for funding of up to €250 million to cater for all GLOS and AOS participants next year to get full year funding in 2016.
I suppose any proposal that you put forward, dating back to what Albert Reynolds said, if unless it's fully funded and fully costed, then it's not going to be even considered. What has been the reactions at the Minister of Finance level and to a lesser extent at the Department of Agriculture level?
I suppose the thing about it is all of the money we're looking for has actually been committed, Patrick. That's the reality. The Rural Development Programme actually is a very specific plan. There are funding allocations, and so what we're really saying is, up until now, kind of the brakes were on because the programme hadn't been approved in Brussels. It's been approved now, and therefore it is time for the money that is required to be put into the budget so that the schemes can be rolled out.
I suppose, and in a lot of the cases, there's nothing really new as such. It's an increase in the suckler support scheme, a scheme that's already there. TAMS 2, a bit of an increase there, and knowledge transfer. So it isn't something that's necessarily new, as you're saying. It is just a continuation.
No, that's it exactly. I mean, the Rural Development Programme is something that took 2-3 years to be formulated, for the programmes to be identified, to be approved in Brussels and so on. So as you say, it's not actually coming up with particularly new ideas or things that haven't been thought of. These are all actually things that both kind of at government level are recognised as priorities. The real issue is that what is the budget about? It's about putting funding allocations in place for different sectors, and so we've identified what's required to do it next year.
I suppose another big issue that you're looking for addressed is equal treatment, as you call it yourselves, between self-employed and PA workers around taxation. That's been a bone of contention for generations nearly. So explain what you're planning there.
That's it, absolutely. I've been told by some of my colleagues that this is something we've been looking for over 20 years. In effect, the other side of the budget is the taxation measures that the government can actually implement. And something that has been a glaring anomaly for many years, in particular in the last decade or two, where the self-employed make their tax returns at the same time as employees and so on, is the fact that there is a difference in treatment via the tax credit system. Put very simply, a self-employed person who is earning approximately the minimum wage, which is about €17,500, and an employee on the same rate, the self-employed person is paying taxes and charges of about 5 times what the employee is paying. At that level of income, that discrimination just doesn't hold water anymore. And there are indications that the government are looking at it, and we're saying very clearly, really the discrimination that exists at that very low income level has to be addressed.
Is this something that they're going to change overnight on the 15th of October when Minister Noonan stands up and makes his budget speech, or is it something that is possibly going to be phased in over a couple of years?
Even if it is not introduced all in one go, we would be looking to, I suppose, minimise the discrimination as soon as possible through the introduction of a meaningful tax credit for the self-employed. But in this year's budget, what we're looking for is the ball to get rolling, for it to be started at least. And as I said, at that low income level, you'd like to see it be done in a very short number of steps.
Last year we had a particularly important budget for the agri sector through a range of tax changes. How have they been rolled out, and are they having the reaction and traction that Minister Noonan and the IFA and others have wanted?
Yeah, it's a great question, Patrick, and I have to say the response that we've seen by farmers to the various measures that were introduced in the agri-tax review has been I think, phenomenally successful. In particular, what we've seen in relation to the change in behaviour of farmers taking up and entering into long-term leasing agreements, where before the predominant contract, I suppose, was the short-term con-acre system, which makes no sense for either party. We've seen a huge uptake in that, and what we are trying to do with the tax measures that we've proposed this year is actually build upon some of the measures in last year's agri-tax review. In particular, and I suppose I'd like to just focus in on one, we're very conscious of the fact that the long-term leasing exemption does not exist between family members. There are reasons for that, because the concern would be the farm might never be transferred. So what we have identified is, or proposed, is a measure that would allow one family, 2 generations, to enter into a farming partnership for a defined period of time, at the end of which time the farm would be transferred to the next generation. But during the time of the partnership, there would be an income tax incentive or an income tax relief for the parents to encourage them to, I suppose, move forward on the lifetime transfer. One of the realities is that parents, I think, in a lot of cases would love to transfer to their children earlier, but the reality is, can the farm actually generate 2 incomes? So what we've tried to do is identify a model that will achieve what we're all looking for, which is earlier lifetime transfers.
And finally, just put this all in context, budget, can sometimes mean very little to a lot of people, but how important, how crucial is this, and what is it going to mean for farmers on the ground? If you get what you want, and this is essentially going to mean more money in farmers' pockets in 2016.
That's actually a reality. I remember many years ago thinking just how much influence and power the Minister for Finance had every time once he stood up once a year. And while people actually may not give it much thought, the reality of the matter is the decisions that will be taken over the next few months and will be read out by Minister Noonan on the 14th or 15th of October will determine what money goes into the farm schemes, and all farmers know that is a direct income support, and on the other side, how the taxation system might affect them. And if there is something, for example, like a tax credit introduced for self-employed people, that actually just means a lower amount of tax having to be paid by people at a lower income.
Rowena, thanks very much.
Thank you.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Now, let's sit down with Tommy Moyles, beef farmer and regular contributor to our popular Farmer Rights column. On a recent trip to West Cork, I stopped by his farm and I asked him whether he shared the positive attitude seen in the beef industry these past few months.
Things are going pretty good. We're fine-tuning the move to finishing. We're looking at finishing the cull heifers from the house next spring to free up more grass for cows, to possibly expand there. Also, maybe just that'll allow us to reduce and fertiliser further and make best use out of what we got. We're thinking that a heifer has the potential to finish off an awful lot less ration faster anyway. So, there was probably a half dozen of the heifers weaned close to 390 over 400 kilos last September. So, 500 kilo live is what we've been targeting there in the past. So if we can get that faster, why not?
The move from being a suckler store or a weanling store to finishing, not without its difficulties at a financial and practical level, how was the transition?
I suppose we thought about it for years, but it wasn't until things went wrong, and look, we cattle returned to a mart to a closed herd. It created a disease nightmare. Rotavirus came in. We got absolutely no support in terms of a comeback from the mart or the people we were dealing with. And the few cattle that came back, we decided to finish them. And we saw how straightforward it was. And we said, right, if we're going to do the work, let's keep the money from it.
The accidental finish or so?
Accidental finish. It was always in the back of our heads, but it was like, oh, we don't have a diet feeder, and we'd heard enough people saying, you can't do without that. And, sometimes you have to stop listening to everyone and take a chance.
You've been forthright enough in your opinions on some of the inadequacies, or some of the failures, I suppose, on the beef side of things. Where and how can the beef sector drive forward from here? What is going to be a challenging time, in particular with the influx of dairy animals onto the scene?
I suppose there are opportunities, but I think we need to be realistic with beef. No one's saying what it really is. It's dominated by hobby guys and part-time, and that's not an insult to those people. You do the best of what you can anyway. But to be making a decision and looking at your averages, it throws the average. There's no way in hell that every farmer is going close to the 400 or the over the 400 calf interval. But if you have 4 or 5 cows and they're your hobby and you like those cows, then if they have a calf every 2 years, so you're happy. You know, and multiply that, there's 39,000, I think, farms with 10 cows or less. And that's a lot of farms, you know, and maybe we're not lucky enough. I'm big on for seeing what makes guys succeed in a non-subsidised environment. And if it can work for them and they can make money, then surely there's an opportunity for us here to do similar practice and still have that bonus of that European money come in.
One thing you've spoken about in the last couple of weeks is perhaps the need for a levy on beef farmers. First of all, why? And second of all, what would you want it to do?
I think there's a disregard from a lot of farmers for the service that Teagasc provide. A disregard and a disconnect.
Is it easy to kick Teagasc?
Oh, it's dog easy to do that. But if you're not doing any of the information that they're researching, then who's to blame? It's a fantastic service, but there is that disconnect because, from what I see, it's very hard for a farmer to get his opinion across in it. What I would be proposing would be, you have 11 Teagasc regions. Say, for example, in a West Cork one, you'd pick a snapshot of levy-paying farmers, obviously, who are part-time, suckler, finisher, whichever. Bring along your advisors, have at least 2 representatives from Board BA. Then you're going to know what your market wants for a few years' time. The people on the ground know what's required in the area and the ability of both the land and the people as well. And you can formulate your research around that rather than having a central research. You couldn't have a research farm here where I am, and there's no point in me telling a guy who's farming over in Coomhalla or down the middle of Beara how to use his grass, because it's completely different. That's the challenge at the moment. Realistically, in my view, after seeing you last year, like Grange it's a set up dairy farm, and your suckler cow is going to push to the non-dairy country. That she's the only cow capable of getting return out of some of the more challenging ground with a low labour input and a low cost input. That seems to be disregarded. You know, we're not breeding grass animals.
So, you know, in an ideal scenario, we want to take a percentage of a levy and put it into research. What would you want to see as the outcome of that research? I know it's nice to bring the likes of Teagasc and Board BA together, but what do they need to deliver? Because you look at it now, dairy farmers have Moore Park, they have Greenfield. The suckler farmer has nowhere to go to see best practice. Is that essentially what we need to see? Yes,
and I think a starting point for that could be the use of more, I suppose, monitor farms as a start. They're in every region. You have the better farms as they are, but there's people outside that, there's guys doing serious profit at beef that we never hear from. It's only when you have to go off the beaten track to find them. I think we aim at mediocrity too much. And there's too many fellas probably listening to the people that tell them, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. And there's times you have to back yourself and take that chance. And look, if you mess up, you mess up. But it's a bigger mess up if you do it a second time.
BDGP letters going out this week telling farmers if they're 4 or 5 stars or 2 stars or 1 stars. What is your own opinion on the scheme? And can it drive efficiency? Can it drive an improvement in the suckler industry? Or is it, as some people say, just an opportunity for the dairy farms to get rid of the byproducts?
It'll be a test of how serious suckler farmers are. The buck stops with each farmer, number one, for their own farm. And it's easy to blame everyone else. My view of it, we're doing most of the stuff as it stands. We're recording more data, certainly, than a commercial herd is required to. Most pedigree herds, we're recording more data than pedigree herds are required to. But it comes back to us saving labour and saving time here, and that's our priority. If we can increase cow numbers in time, I don't know how the opportunities will come up, but if they do come up, that we're in a position to take advantage, because we'll have low labour animals that are capable of doing it off grass. That's more important to me than sticking rigidly to a scheme and, oh, you must be under a certain stocking rate, blah de blah. Yeah, look, it's back to that confidence thing, and maybe most farmers are listening to the wrong people.
Look, it's not all doom and gloom. Suckling industry is a good sector to be in. And to finish on a positive note, what makes you get out of bed every morning, throw on the wellies and step out in the yard saying, look, I can?
I suppose a big part of it is I don't have to do that every morning, because like once you hit summertime, look, once your calving is over and you have a decent system for grazing and you get into the routine, then it's very straightforward. Beef can successfully be run on a part-time basis, especially when numbers and scale is smaller. It's a very rewarding lifestyle. I'll pull it back. I make this work because I want to make it work. I love doing what I'm doing. Like, I'm one of those few people that when I was 5 and starting primary school, I'm doing that job now. And it was one of the guys I met at Christmas when his class said it to me. I said, that drives me. Like, I don't know what it is. I just have this click. I love doing that. But I love challenging myself too. The more people who said you can't do well out of beef, the more that drives me on.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
On Monday, speakers from a range of Irish organisations concerned about the ongoing trade negotiations between Europe and the US, otherwise known as TTIP, exchanged their views at a seminar in Dublin. One of them was IFA Munster Chairman James McCarthy, and the Irish Farmers Journal digital editor Thomas Hubert asked him why farmers should be worried about the trade talks.
I attended this seminar, which was organised by Matt Carthy, Sinn Féin MEP, and we welcomed the opportunity to speak to a diverse audience on TTIP. I suppose there was a couple of speakers there, Patricia King from SIPTU, a speaker from Friends of the Earth, and Kathleen O'Meara from the Irish Cancer Association. So it was a fairly diverse panel. We would obviously have our issues, and your listeners would be familiar with IFA opposition to trade deals going back to GATT in the early 90s and the WTO campaign which peaked in 2008. But there's a bit more broader opposition to this one, principally around the area of where multinational companies can, if they see that in one jurisdiction they're allowed to do something and if in another jurisdiction they're not, that they can take action through a tribunal bypassing the court system in member states. It's ISDS, Investor State Dispute Settlement. So I saw that took up a fair bit of the discussion, but we focused on our own issues related to agriculture, which principally are, equivalence of standards that European farmers can't be expected to compete against countries which have a lower standard.
So would that principally apply to beef? We've heard a lot about hormones and practices like that are very different between here and North America. Are there other issues like that as well?
Yeah, I suppose the beef sector would be our main concern because, European and Irish beef production is at a smaller scale to the US, and there's restrictions in Europe on hormones and other growth promoters. And also, we'd have higher feed costs because, the US have big grain production and they're allowed to use GMs and easier to regulate there. So, our beef sector, we think, would be vulnerable. Maybe not so much at the moment because we see beef price in the US at a record high, but things can change around between currency movements and relative prices and so forth. So, we want, particular in this deal, that, equivalence of standards be taken into account, and the efforts that Irish beef producers go to maintain those standards, from whether it's tagging or restricted use of products or recording dates and things like that, that be taken into account.
Isn't there an argument, though, to say that if there was a deal that would help Irish producers export to the US?
Yeah, I mean, in any trade deal there's positives, and I suppose what we see with this deal is that, there's a strong Irish-American community, and we've strong trade links with the US, so, there's a lot of, there are potentially some positives, but our position is that the government cannot countenance a trade deal that would damage farmers and Irish agriculture exports, so, we want to make that a red line issue for the government and for the EU. But, there are other sectors present today, and they have their issues as well.
Is there common ground with other sectors? You said there were environmentalists, other sectors in industry, labour relations. Yeah,
a pretty diverse group, but there's a general understanding, I suppose, that, a trade deal with the US is desirable in some ways, but that everyone's concerns need to be taken into account, and that, no one wants this deal rushed through. And there's, concern that some of the actions by the previous commission were very much, behind closed doors, and that if this deal is to be as good as we're led to believe it is, then it should be carried out in a transparent fashion. So we welcome the engagement with those groups today, and we have our own communication with TDs and with the Oireachtas committees and with the Commission and so forth on this issue, and it's one of the issues, that we expect to be dealing with over the next year or two. Nobody wants a bad trade deal, if there's to be a deal and there's positives in it and it respects standards that European farmers have to, well, so be it. But nobody wants a bad deal, because if that unwound and if it had huge negative impacts on farmers and on rural Ireland, then I think it would undermine that whole process.
We had an article in farmersjournal.ie at the weekend by our market specialist, Féin, who heard noises from some negotiators that maybe it would be better to leave beef out of the treaty altogether. Would that be a potential solution for you?
Well, I suppose there's other products that could be vulnerable, pigs and poultry. Maybe there's opportunities for dairy and sheep. But I don't think that's an option. There's a bilateral trade deal with Canada, and we've seen trade deals with Mercosur. The other side may not wish to take that off the table. And if it's on the table, but with respect for our standards, that would probably be the best outcome.
James McCarthy, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Thomas.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
That was IFA's James McCarthy talking to my colleague Thomas Hubert, who happens to be one of the many journalists here who first set foot in the Irish Farmers Journal as an intern. Another one is Irish Country Living's Mary Phelan, who told Ciara Leahy that internships are an increasingly attractive way of entering the job market.
Having work experience going into the jobs market in today's environment is crucial. I spoke to Rory Kavanagh of Grad Ireland. Now, Grad Ireland is the largest graduate recruitment website in Ireland, and he was saying that 80% of students will do work experience, but it's not always related to your degree. So kind of the key message is to get some work experience, but don't be worrying if it's not directly related to what you're doing. Just where possible, go out there and get it.
And I suppose the whole thing about getting work experience is it's a catch-22. You can't seem to get work experience without some experience. But definitely it seems like the internship scene in Ireland is improving at the moment. So can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, so basically, I guess that's what internships are there for in the first place, is to give those people who don't really have any work experience at all a structured environment and programme on which they can get proper work experience. Things during the recession, I guess, companies maybe weren't as likely to take on people, or if they were taking on people, they weren't going to be paying for them. But according to Grad Ireland's Graduate Salary and Graduate Recruitment Trends Survey 2014-2015, of the 100 employers that they surveyed, 86% of those employers are now offering internships, and 93% of those that are offering internships are paying for them. And the average pay for internships is currently €1,600 to €1,800 per month. So it's quite significant pay.
Absolutely. Is there any industries in particular that are very good at giving young people an opportunity?
There certainly is. Accounting firms and law firms have very long established internship programs in Ireland. According to Grad Ireland, there's been an increase in the number of companies offering internships. There's been an increase in the amount of companies paying for internships, and there's been an increase in what's being paid for internships. So that's across the board. But definitely accounting and law firms have very long, very well established internship programs. And I spoke to one particular lady, Tara Doyle from Matheson, which is a law firm here in Dublin. And Matheson takes on 80 interns every summer. So they take on 40 in June and 40 in July. And the great thing about doing an internship with Matheson is that you are then much more likely to get a position on their traineeship program to become a solicitor. So it used to be that they would fill those trainee solicitor positions 50% from the internship program and 50% would come from the traditional milk round in November. Now Matheson are actually filling their trainee solicitor positions 2/3 from the internship, and 1/3 is then coming from the milk round. But Tara was very quick to stress to me that while internships are very important and are a great way to get a job with someone like them, that there is still a very important place for the milk round at the moment.
You're saying Matheson is a really good company that are keeping people on, but there's always one that really stands out from the crowd. Is that Matheson, or are there other ones that really catch your attention?
KPMG last year were awarded the best internship programme from Grad Ireland. KPMG is the largest private sector recruiter in Ireland. The company takes on almost 300 graduates every autumn, and in terms of internships, they take on 130 people on internships and work placements during the year. Now, many of those are coming from college, when you get a semester in college where you have to go out and work experience. But the lady that I was speaking to, KPMG, says that she kind of attributes the success of their programme, or why they received the accolade last last year is a mix of one-to-one support they offer to students and the HR training support. So every intern is given a buddy and a performance manager, and there's also on-the-job development. So she thinks it's kind of the mixture of all of that is why they received the award that they did.
Excellent. And just lastly, I suppose, across the board, is there a trend that if you do very well in an internship, you will get, you know, a more permanent job after that?
Certainly. I mean, I think we even know that ourselves here in Country Living, Ciara. I came up through the internship programme. Many of the people we have working here in the office come from the internship programme. It's an avenue and it's a pathway into a company, and really it is up to you then. I mean, in some companies like Madison, like A&L Goodbody, which is another law firm which guarantees everybody who does an internship with them, they're guaranteed an interview for the trainee solicitor programme. So there are some places where there's kind of a precedent built up that X amount of people from the internship programme will more than likely go on and get graduate jobs at the company. But then you have other places like the Farmers Journal where there mightn't necessarily be 10 or 20 positions to be filled every year. We're too small a company. But you come in here, you make yourself indispensable, you show everything you have to offer. You can also possibly down the line get a job at us. It's just a different way and a different size of company, I suppose. So there's different ways of doing it, but the bottom line is internships will get your foot in the door.
Absolutely. And that's obviously relevant to so many people that are just coming out of college now, or perhaps are going into their final year in college and thinking about what the next step is. And all the details about that and to learn more are in this week's Irish Country Living.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.